Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 32. I'm Steve Kwan.
Howdy!
He's Matt Kwan.
How's it going, guys?
BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent BJJ approach.
Sorry, everyone.
I'm not going to reshoot that. I'm going to leave that.
All right.
So today, we're going to be talking about body tethering. This is a mental model that we've discussed in the past, but I think it's important enough to do a full chat on this because it has a lot of implications to how you play jiu-jitsu. It also has implications to self-defense and MMA because a lot of the things that you can get away with in sport jiu-jitsu probably are not so wise to do in an actual fight.
So by body tethering, Steve, do you mean just connecting yourself to your opponent's torso or even limb and basically trying to fuse yourself to them?
Yeah, great point. So let's define this term and what it means. Something that we've talked about in prior episodes is the different types of guard, for example, that you can play. And I know that your professor, Rob Bernacki, kind of breaks them down into different families of guards. And one of the types is what he calls a clamp-based guard, meaning you are basically clamping onto your opponent. And the most obvious form of this is closed guard, right? You're effectively tying yourself to your opponent by crossing your legs around them.
Right.
And a lot of submissions work the same way, right? Like a triangle, you're basically tying yourself to your body, or to your body to your opponent. An armbar is the same thing. A rear naked choke is the same thing. I mean, if we're realistic, a lot of jiu-jitsu involves tying your body around your opponent's body. That's how you control them. Now, that can be very beneficial or possibly dangerous for you, depending on the situation. And something that is often not clear, especially to white belts, but even up to more advanced people, is when is it safe to latch onto your opponent like that, and when is it going to result in me getting smashed or getting my guard passed? And that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, and discuss some of the situations where body tethering could be very successful, because at a high level, if you understand the concepts that break down your opponent. Of course, we're going to touch on alignment like we've done before. Then it's actually quite safe. But obviously, in some scenarios, tethering yourself to someone who's newer or someone who is much bigger, or if you don't break their alignment, you could end up injured or just in a really bad position. So let's touch on that.
Yeah. So the way that I like to think of it is if you do body tethering right, then your body is going to be like an anchor or something that ties your opponent down and restricts their motion. If you do body tethering wrong, then your body is going to be like a tetherball on a high school playground and you're going to be bouncing around in circles, right?
That's good.
That's not where you want to be. So the main difference between when it works and when it doesn't is, does my opponent have proper alignment when I tie my body to them? Because that's what's going to allow them to invert the position and to take dominance on you, right? Like the most probably visual example of this is if I try to triangle someone and they still have their posture, if they're powerful enough, they can pop up and just slam me, right? That's an example of where you have tethered your body to your opponent, but you did not properly deal with their alignment first. If, on the other hand, you triangle someone and you are able to break them down, for example, by grabbing their leg, or maybe they're just not, you flatten them out somehow, if they can't pop up and pick you up, then you're generally totally safe. So same situation, but just the different alignment of your opponent changes whether the body tethering is safe or unsafe given that circumstance.
Yeah, and for some of you guys who are new to the podcast, the first episode we did, episode 1, was on alignment, and it's the core concept of our jiu-jitsu system under Professor Rob Bernacki. And basically, just a brief refresher, alignment is posture, structure, base. I just think of these as like the 3 building blocks that make up your body's ability to be efficient, whether it's jiu-jitsu or weightlifting or whatever. We never want to exert physical force in an inefficient way, and doing so could lead to injury or just underwhelming performance. So when we're talking about alignment, we're talking about posture, structure, and base. And these are all, I think you can agree, Steve, like they're all equally important when we're talking about I don't put one ahead of the other. They're all kind of important, and eliminating one or two or even 3 of them has devastating effects on your opponent because it denies them the ability to defend.
Yeah, I think that you can't really prioritize one of those 3 things above the other, because the reality is if your opponent is good, any weakness that you leave, they're going to find a way to exploit it. Like if you're protecting your posture by guarding your neck and keeping upright, they're going to switch to attacking your structure or your base. Or if you're protecting your base by, like tucking your feet and making sure that you can retain your movement, they might grab your head or grab your arm or something, right? So it's like the saying, a chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Alignment is only as strong as whichever of those three you've compromised.
Yeah, and the score game that we've referred to in the alignment episode would be, you have three of the alignment, posture, structure, base. Your opponent has those three, posture, structure, base, and you're trying to eliminate your opponent's posture, structure, base while maintaining your own. And if you do so, eliminate two of the three or three of the three, it's time to usually go for a submission. So, for example, attacking a triangle without a wedge behind the head and affecting the posture is kind of dangerous because, you're liable to get slammed, and, assuming that can happen, or they're just going to explode and possibly pass your guard. Just like, going for an arm bar on someone who has full posture is almost a guaranteed guard pass for them. Just doesn't make sense to implement a technique on someone who has the ability to defend. And this is something that, I kind of wish that I knew when I was a lot newer to BJJ, because you can take it and use it right away. I find that teaching the concept of alignment and what we call alignment over position. Sorry. Learning alignment over position kind of teaches you to recognize when your opponent is actually vulnerable to be attacked, rather than just looking for a technique, right? So alignment over position just means before we try any given technique, whether it's a sweep or a takedown or a submission, we want to make sure that we break the alignment of our opponent so that they can't defend.
Yeah, this is something that I wish I knew a lot sooner. And this is a great explanation, Matt. But the general idea is that, sometimes you look at something and technically you might have back mount on someone, or technically you might have side control on someone.
I like the Kimura example.
Yeah. But if you don't really have the person's alignment broken, you don't really have much. And to Matt's point about the Kimura example, yes, I can latch onto your arm like I have a Kimura.
Like a figure four.
Yeah, like a figure four on your arm. But if you're still able to keep that arm tucked tight to your body and I can't pull it free, then I haven't broken your alignment. I mean, it might look like I've got a Kimura, but I'm probably not going to be able to finish. Whereas a good Kimura is where I am able to pull and extract that arm free from the rest of the body. It might look very similar to the untrained eye, but the difference is profound when you're actually sparring with someone. A Kimura will only work if you can actually pull that arm free from the rest of the person's body.
Yeah, and what Steve is describing is Ryan Hall has called it the open elbow before, which is, when he first started showing that really changed a lot of people's game and helped people understand how the Kimura works. The way that we describe it is internal rotation of the shoulder joint. And only by creating that internal rotation where your partner's shoulder is, locked out, that's only when you do that is going to be where you get the control to be able to transition to the back or transition to triangles or whatever you're going to do with the Kimura. Failure to internally rotate the shoulder usually ends up with your opponent escaping the Kimura. Yeah. And if you're someone who's not, you're having issues making your Kimura work, it's probably because you're not effectively rotating the lever internally properly. So, luckily bjjconcepts.net is a great resource to learn the Kimura system.
So
shameless plug.
So how this all ties to body tethering, the general idea is if your opponent has good posture, structure, and base, maybe now is not the time to throw up a submission, even or throw up a particular position, even if technically you can get into it. Like a perfect example is if I can try to triangle you, if I used to think when I started off that my opponent could be sitting there with perfect posture and I could just throw my legs up and then pull them down to the ground.
Yeah, for me, sorry to cut you off. For me, it was always I was trained to think about isolating the head and arm.
Yes.
But I wasn't trained to think about looking at my opponent's neck or spine. And if you shoot up your legs and try and trap their head and arm while they have a straight posture, you're gonna get past.
Yeah. This is actually why I started thinking of this term as body tethering, is because what would happen is I would, my opponent would have posture, and maybe I'd be able to grab their arm, and I'd try to throw up a triangle while they were fully postured up, and I felt like a tetherball, because my opponent was like a straight up pull, and they could just move me however they wanted. And I thought, why can't I get this triangle? And at first I thought, oh, it's just because I'm not big enough or strong enough, or my legs aren't, long enough. But I realized after a while it's because I was prioritizing the wrong thing. I was technically in a triangle position, but I had not created the broken alignment that is required to actually get that triangle. Like, it's not a matter of step 1, get the triangle, step 2, break the alignment. The way you actually need to think about these situations is step 1, break the alignment, step 2, get the triangle. That's the same with almost any submission or sweep. You want to have the alignment broken before you start trying to actually apply a specific technique.
Yeah, alignment over position is such an important concept, and it works two ways. So not only can you use it offensively in terms of applying a hold, but you can also use it defensively. So if I know that I'm inside my opponent's guard, if I feel them start breaking down my head, I can be pretty sure that an attack is starting to come on now. Or if they're isolating one of my arms, that's more of the obvious answer. If someone's trying to 2-on-1 your arm, you can be pretty sure they're going to try and attack your arm. But understanding like what would stop your opponent's offense, usually being just good alignment and posture structure base. Understanding that it'll work in the reverse as well, so that it'll be very difficult to submit you because alignment is kind of the main thing that makes you either offensively effective or defensively effective.
Yeah. And an important thing too is even when you're in top position, body tethering is still something to think about. If you are on top of your opponent and say you have side control, for example, you still have to be careful, because if you latch onto them too tight, they can barrel roll you. Or if they're really strong, that's actually quite easy to do. So even when you're on top, you have to be careful not to be so tightly connected to your opponent that you're subjected to their movement, right? That's really the thing that I like to think about when I'm thinking about body tethering. I want to make sure that if I'm tying myself to my opponent, I'm doing so in such a way that I have the power and the control and not them. It doesn't make sense to grab and latch onto a person if doing so is going to give them the ability to move you. Yeah. It only makes sense to grab onto someone if doing so is going to give you the ability to move them. Yeah. So you see this a lot, for example, where, especially if you're on top, sometimes people just cling on to the person on the bottom. If the person is strong enough, they can roll you from that position, or if nothing else, they can use the fact that you're latched onto them to create their own movement. And now you're subjected to their movement, because if you're tethered to them, you have to go where they go. So good body tethering prevents your opponent from moving, not you.
That's right. And when you're in that top position, like you described, Steve, it's important to make sure that you're not just grabbing onto their torso just to grab on, because then sometimes maybe your hands would be in a better position if you were basing, right? Because then at least you can, you might still be able to create wedges around your opponent's body to control them, but if they start bucking, you're not going to get flipped over, because your hands could actually be used for base. And usually in the top position, I think the best way to maintain a top position is not just holding your opponent tight, but more so thinking about how you can either isolate limbs or even isolate their head, or put a frame against their head so that their posture is compromised, or even one of my favorites is literally just crushing their face with my stomach, which
I am aware.
Super effective.
Yeah, you and all of your students do this. It's so annoying.
The north-south pass.
Yeah, or just like I go to Matt's school to train sometimes, and like all of his guys will do like nose cranks. You'll be like, I'll be just defending myself from turtle or something, and they'll just like elbow you in the nose and just use that as a lever to pull your head.
Yeah. The nose is a lever.
Yeah. It is a lever. Like, it's not illegal to use nose cranks to break up, to pull the person's head free.
If any of our listeners think that face cranks are not cool or cheap or whatever, I mean, come on. It's a move. Yeah. You got to defend it.
The thing to bear in mind is, they might be not cool. They might not be cheap, but they're legal, and you're still going to be susceptible to face cranks, right?
Exactly.
There's nothing illegal about like manipulating someone's neck by moving their nose.
Yeah.
So
tucking your chin is not a defense.
Yeah, it's actually a good example of how we get used to training in kind of in a comfort zone in terms of things that we think are safe, or, maybe there's etiquette in a gym where there's certain things that, although technically legal, are just not really done because they're considered mean. But you know what? If those are actually legal, then it's something you need to factor in. And even going beyond that, if something is not sport legal, that does not rule it out in an MMA or a self-defense situation, right? And this is where body tethering is so important. Technically speaking, in sport jiu-jitsu, maybe I can jump on you and just like latch onto you and close guard like a koala while you're standing up. Like in sport jiu-jitsu, that might be workable, where if you're totally standing up, I can just be like holding close guard on you, kind of like a fanny pack, or just kind of hanging off the front of you. But if you try to do that in MMA or in a self-defense situation, you're going to die.
Or even ADCC allows slams, right? Like, I think we're pretty much specifically talking about
slams,
IBJJF rules and local tournament rules that follow the IBJJF rule set. That's where you're going to start seeing, like, no reaping, no face cranking, no spine twists. Like, it's kind of a pussified version of jiu-jitsu, but I think it's more of an Olympic style of jiu-jitsu if there was one. And back to the face cranking. I mean, the thing about the attacking the face is we're seeing so many really great back attack setups, from smothering the face, from cranking the neck. Like you can expose the chin a lot by going for face cranks and keeping your opponent in a constant state of panic and defense just by attacking their face. But also, like, take Wagner Hocha, for example. He's got I think he calls it the Python, where he literally takes the palm of his free hand and smothers the guy's mouth and nose with it, and thus causing panic and a lack of oxygen to his opponent, which usually will I've seen him submit people with that, but you can also use that to open up other chokes. So is it dirty? Yeah, it's not the nicest technique, but you can't deny its effectiveness. So therefore, how is it not jiu-jitsu?
Well, it's kind of funny because that all comes down to controlled breathing. We've talked about how important it is to control your breathing. First of all, because it allows you to control your energy level, but also it allows you to control your mental and emotional state. And cutting off someone's air supply is a very primal thing, and it's not illegal to do, right? I mean, like, a lot of the time when I'm playing, if I have mount on someone, a big part of what I'm trying to do is like use my shoulder or my stomach to cover their face so they can't breathe, right? Something I learned from my instructor. He would do that to me, and it's like, you can be the most composed, calm person in the world, but if someone does that to you for like 60 seconds, your whole game plan falls apart really, really quick.
And it breaks your posture as well. I've noticed, like, in mount, having a really low mount where you're driving your torso into their face, you're so close to them that they can't frame effectively with their arms. And it's even better if you don't have a rash guard on, because even better if you have a hairy stomach, which is just absolutely disgusting. We've all been there, right? But like, again, dirty, yes, but super effective.
Well, it's funny. It comes down to doing what works. This is something that we talked about as a mental model that is always good practice. It's very easy to get wrapped up in the dogma of what is considered proper etiquette and what isn't. And that closes your mind to opportunities that actually are totally okay and legal, but you've been conditioned to think that they're not okay, right? And that's not just a jiu-jitsu thing. That happens in all walks of life. A lot of really, really like disruptive, explosive business successes come from someone questioning something that just seems just absolutely crazy or impossible, like questioning things that just seem totally nonsense. Like, it's crazy now to think about it, but most of our phones today don't have buttons. That's a crazy thing. Like, go back in time 10 years, 15 years and tell people, like, we're getting rid of buttons on phones, and people would think you're a total lunatic. But like, can you imagine going back to like a BlackBerry type phone that's just like a giant like smorgasbord of buttons? Someone questioned something that everyone just took as common sense, and it turned out there was a better way to do things. And like, we wouldn't have things like Siri and artificial intelligence that allows you to guess what your typing is. Like, we wouldn't have that stuff if someone didn't question, well, do we really need all of these buttons on our phone? And it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu, right? If we're all trained, don't cover the mouth. We're all trained, don't like tweak the guy's nose, because that's just not good etiquette. it. But there's nothing in the rules saying you can't do it. It's not going to hurt the guy, really. Well, the nose thing might, but, honestly, probably not really. So why can't you do it at the end of the day if the rules say that there's nothing wrong with it?
Yeah, I've actually... I may be wrong because I'm not super sure how Wagner does it, but I'm pretty sure he takes his palm and pushes down on the nose so that it covers the nose, actually smushes and covers the nostrils. It's super awesome. Instead of covering with your actual hand, he uses the guy's nose pushing downward to cover the nostrils.
Yeah.
And especially if he's got a motorcycle grip with the other hand, it's super hard to get out of there. And you anytime he wants, he can basically go for a face crank at that point. So,
well, you've seen the thing that my instructor does, right? Where he goes under the nose and he smashes your nose and pushes it up to get at the neck. It's it's the worst. But
why wouldn't you do it if it exposes a choke or if it helps you finish a technique?
And frankly, it will teach the other guy to learn that is a vector of attack, and you got to defend that.
Exactly. Well, it's like if you go to a school that's and there's a lot of schools, even some of the higher level schools. A lot of them don't allow reaping. They don't allow heel hooks.
First of all, it's heaping. It's not reaping.
Master Helio would not have wanted it. Yeah. But that we've discussed before, that's really out of a lack of information, a lack of education of how to defend, how to react properly to a reap, right? Where someone's absolutely just gonna try and spin out and then or spin the wrong way even, and as a result they've hurt themselves. When the reaping motion is actually not super dangerous. In fact, a lot of De La Riva positions I find a little bit more dangerous than reaping itself, right? Mm-hmm. So it's all about education and awareness and understanding, and not so much about the actual technique, right?
Yeah. So this actually does have interesting implications when it comes to body tethering, because a mistake that a lot of people make is when they see that someone has exposed their back, they kind of get tunnel vision, like a horse with blinders, and they think, I've got to get this person's back. The opening is there. But is it really, right? Just because a person has exposed their back, that doesn't mean you have back control. And if you try to jump on top of a person and take their back, and you cannot get seatbelt control and you cannot get hooks, then actually you have tethered yourself to the other person, but they have control. This is something that I do all the time now, is I will give up my back and go underneath a person and they get excited, but if they can't get anything on me, I'll sweep them every single time. And it works even on very high level guys. This is a good example of where that Wagner-Hocha approach is actually helpful, because one of the things that you can do if the person is all turtled up from the bottom, before you jump up and tether yourself to them, you can actually use that approach to free up their neck and to free up their nose, right? Because if they're tied up in a ball and you can't get at their arms or their legs, you can face crank and use that to open up their head and then use their neck as a lever. And if you're going to jump on someone's back, you want to have some sort of lever control before you just put your weight on top of them.
Yeah. And, a common thing that happens when you're new to jiu-jitsu, or even I see it all in the kids class when they're on the back, is you fall off. It's one of the main things that happens when you first start learning jiu-jitsu and you try and get on someone's back, is you kind of slide off. Mm-hmm. So just a few things that I could mention that will make your back take successful or unsuccessful. If things that will not help you take the back are thinking about getting your hooks first, because usually getting your hooks first leads to a lack of connection with your upper body. Let's be honest, the hooks is basically like a points thing. It does add extra control, but I feel like
it's a rudder is the way I think of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the true control comes from your head position. If you're going to be successful at taking someone's back, you want to have that chest on their back. You want to have good head position, meaning your head's not super high where you're going to fall off, but hopefully right next to them, acting as a wedge next to their head so they can't actually mobilize their neck. And also, like you said, either isolating a lever, like a Kimura, and not just, when I say isolating a lever, I mean breaking the alignment of that lever, not just latching onto that lever.
Because if you just latch on, I've done this to people before, where if I'm turtled up in a ball and they try to jump on me and grab my arm, but they're not able to extract it free, you can do a Seo Inagi from the bottom while in turtle on the guy, right? Yeah. So that's an example of where people get overly excited. They tether to the guy on the bottom without breaking their alignment, and then they go for a ride.
Mm-hmm. And also understanding, we've discussed breaking down just the human body that it's 4 levers ahead and a torso, controlling the corners of their body. We've discussed rotational control in a previous episode where, I want to be able to dictate where which direction my opponent could roll. So if I'm taking someone's back, they're in the turtle position, I want to make sure that I know that that they won't be able to turn one way because maybe I've exposed a motorcycle grip on the other side, and they can't turn the other way because it means they're either going belly down, or maybe I've got opposite side corners controlled. And that's kind of the basis of taking the back for me. And then from there, you can follow them wherever they may roll or however they may move, keeping your head in good position, and then eventually ending up with the hooks using either a Kimura control, a motorcycle control, or a seatbelt control. Yeah.
So the way that I teach back mount to my students is I tell them that you can prioritize 3 different things with back mount. The number one most important thing is connecting your chest to your opponent's back and keeping it there. That is absolutely the most important thing. If you can do that and keep that connection, you have a really good back mount no matter what else happens. The second most important thing is arm control, meaning usually this means getting a seatbelt on your opponent, but it can also mean like double underhooks from the back. It can mean a lot of different things, or like a motorcycle grip. But generally speaking, the reason why you want your hands there is they hold that chest to back connection. That is their focus, is it allows you to keep chest to back connection even when your opponent moves. The third and least important thing is the hooks, because the hooks really, their only actual functional purpose is they kind of allow you to sort of cut your opponent's body in half and prevent them from being able to really effectively use their legs and turn around. And you can use your hooks like a rudder to kind of steer your opponent if they start trying to roll out or spin out. From my mind, the hooks are the least important thing. You can actually have a very effective back control without hooks at all. And in fact, I play that a lot of the time. One of the things that I tell my guys is, if this comes right back to body tethering, before you jump on and try to sink your hooks onto your opponent, make sure you've got chest to back, make sure you've got a seatbelt or something, because once you throw all of your weight on top of them and try to get those hooks in, if you don't have the other 2 things first and you're just going for the hooks, you're probably going to go for a ride.
Yeah, I find that the hooks, like you said, most of my back takes come from head position and arm position, whether I'm clasping my hands together to be isometrically strong, or if I'm isolating a lever and my opponent's head. Usually the hooks are an afterthought, but I do find that finishing from the back, that's where the hooks tend to be more important, because if you relinquish control with your arms, sometimes your opponent's able to escape. So you can use your hooks, whether it's a body triangle or just classic hooks, or maybe you've got a rear mount where your hook is isolating one of their arms, thus making them, only leaving them with one arm to defend. I find that's a good use of the hooks when it's time to actually go for a finish.
That's a good point. I mean, every back mount escape that I can think of, except for maybe the one that we talked about before the podcast, but almost every back mount escape that I can think of involves a rotational escape, like basically turning your body around to face your opponent again. And that's where the hooks really come into play. They help prevent your opponent from rotating out while you are transitioning your hands to a choke or an arm lock. So that's where the hooks come into play. And I guess now you've got to explain that escape that you were talking about.
We're just discussing one of my... I actually know this guy from before. He's a really high-level judo black belt. Not really super well trained in jiu-jitsu, but just like really awesome judo. And just super explosive and about 10 pounds lighter than me. This guy actually just joined my school last week. And, I'm rolling with him, and like, you can just tell some guys are super explosive, and I got to his back. So positionally, I can kind of get to where I need to go, but I was trying to tether myself to his back with a seatbelt, and I could feel him sort of slipping out, and I'm like trying to get at him, but he's so strong. And all of a sudden he basically did a backflip and ended up behind me. And it was, and he did the exact same thing watching him with other guys. And it's just like, it's amazing how different styles and different levels of athleticism, especially like if you're dealing with a really high level wrestler or judo fighter, the athleticism and explosiveness is it can be foreign to the average jiu-jitsu fighter. And it's funny how sometimes these techniques that we wouldn't necessarily teach in class can totally work.
Yeah. It's like, What is it that John Jones said, where he talked about how, he trains low percentage techniques until they become high percentage. Like, this is one of the reasons why it's so important to train with different people and different styles, because if you're used to everyone training the exact same way that you do, you're not going to know how to deal with guys who are like trying to cartwheel past you and somersault past you and do all sorts of crazy stuff, because it's just not something that you're familiar with. This came up today in class. We were talking about different stand-up techniques, and one of the things that I always find challenging is when guys do the judo overhand grip. This is like a tall guy thing, Matt.
I know you're talking.
Where you're like, tall guys love to do this, where they'll like reach over and they'll grab like thumb down onto the back of your collar and they'll push your head down because they're so much taller than you, and it sucks because you can't go over their arm. You can't really drop for guard because they're straight arming you. I'm not quite sure how to deal with it. And not many guys can do it because you've got to be really tall. And so it's one of those things where because you're not used to it, when someone does it to you, you're like, man, I forgot how much this sucks.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and it does suck.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it's actually a tall person move. I would just say that a tall person doing it to a shorter person is going to be way more effective than a short person doing it to a tall person.
Yeah.
So one of my buddies who's a judo fighter actually kind of showed me how to do this, and he said he doesn't actually put the thumb in the collar, even though you can. He grabs the material behind the neck, but the thing that he does is he actually he will, the same hand that's gripping behind the neck, he will actually use his elbow as a frame. So as he's breaking your posture down, he's also framing forward with his elbow, putting you in a box essentially. So
it's like a collar tie, basically.
It's exactly like except it's anchored, so you can't posture up and you can't come forward, and it's really hard to change levels too when they're doing that. Yeah. So. Yeah, I hate getting caught in that grip. It's the worst.
Yeah, on the note of all of this judo stuff, don't ever body tether to a judo person if you can avoid it.
Yeah, like one of my coaches, Mike Lee, if I ever go for like a single leg on him, he basically turns it right into an Uchimata or a Sumigaeshi, and he's just got such good awareness that he knows exactly where to be, and it can be really frustrating to try and take down judo. Although other judokas, if you'll find that like a single leg will be their kryptonite just because of the rules.
They're not used to it, right?
Yeah, they're not used to those rules now. Yeah. So
it's funny though. Like if you could describe judo, like one way to describe judo is like it is the art of getting your opponent to body tether to you and then making them regret it.
Kind of, yeah.
That's basically what judo is, right? Like you use kazushi to force your opponent to body tether to you, and then you plant them on the ground, right? Yeah. It's most judo throws work that way, because judo is so much about like hip explosiveness and getting under the guy. You're kind of forcing them up on top of you, so they're momentarily tethered to you, and then you launch them.
Mm-hmm. And back to just real quick, like when we talk about taking the back and how to make that effective. I find one of the best ways to take the back as well, something we didn't talk about. Like I mentioned head position, and we talked about arm position and leg position, but I think it's really important to think about placing a wedge behind your partner's head, and essentially what that is just breaking posture, right? So not only do you want to like utilize whatever form of control you have, whether you're using a lever or whether you're using a seatbelt, but using a seatbelt, you should also be in a position where your head is on one side of their head and your shoulder is on the other side of their head, and focusing on bending their head downward or to the side is going to really limit their explosiveness, and it's going to keep you in a better position to maintain the back. So something to think about. We're always looking to just break alignment, and it really applies in every position.
Yeah, this is something actually that I got from your instructor. He talked about how like one of the things that is common about every single choke in jiu-jitsu is think of like a triangle around your opponent's head. You've got one of the angled sides of the triangle against one carotid artery. You've got the other angle on the other carotid artery, and then the flat part of the triangle, the horizontal part, is behind the neck. It's at the back of the head. And the purpose of a choke in jiu-jitsu is you've got that triangle around the head, and you use that wedge behind the neck to push down and to shrink down and make that triangle smaller. That has two purposes. It puts pressure on the carotid arteries, but it also breaks posture, right? Because if you have something behind your opponent's head and you're pushing down, not only is it going to shrink that triangle around their neck and choke them, but it's also going to break their posture so they can't get out.
Yeah. When I was first, like you, I think you said this, when I first learned triangles, I almost gave up all the way up until purple because I was like, my legs are not big enough.
I had so many excuses.
Yeah, but now I love the triangle, and it's because instead of looking to isolate their head and arm, instead of looking to make my, the classic triangle shape where you put your foot behind the other knee, I'm looking at their body in terms of alignment, and I'm thinking, okay, I know that if I bend their head, I'm going to maintain this position. Granted, I do everything else correct, but I know that if my opponent is able to get their neck straight and posture up, I might as well switch to something else and have a backup plan, because it's just, there's no way you can triangle someone who has good posture. And that's like the main thing I find that will lead to escapes from that position.
Yeah. Now, of course, the truth of the matter is, if your opponent is bigger and stronger than you, it's going to be harder to apply a triangle. But that said, that just means that you have less room for error on the bottom. The principle is still the same, right? The principle is that you prioritize alignment over the position. So rather than thinking step 1 is get the triangle, step 2 is break alignment, you think of it the other way. Step 1 is break alignment. Step 2 is get the triangle. You don't even attempt the triangle until your opponent's alignment is broken.
That's right.
That's especially important against a bigger guy, because if you do it wrong and they still have alignment, they're going to stack pass you, right? Or if the rule set permits, they're going to pick you up and slam you, and that's the worst case scenario. So a big part of this too is understanding that if your opponent, if you're going for the triangle or the armbar, and it becomes clear to you that you have not successfully broken alignment on your opponent, and you'll know, right? As soon as it becomes clear to you that you have not succeeded, that's when you got to bail out. You've got to either give up the position and go back to guard, or transition to a different attack. You can't kind of desperately hold on and try to finish that move if your opponent still has alignment, because it's going to end up bad for you.
Yeah. You think slam should be legal?
I think slam should be legal. Like, I don't see why high-impact judo throws are legal, but slams are not, right? I mean, the reality is I don't think someone is going to get fundamentally more hurt doing from a slam than they would from, like, a powerful uchimata or something like that, right? At the end of the day, I think, well, yeah, I mean, it's hit or miss, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think that the rule set should be encouraging people to, like, cling on to closed guard while standing up, or cling on to back mount while your opponent is standing. Like, I think that these kinds of things are bad habits. And I know that a lot of the things have been, taken out for safety. And I know that jiu-jitsu as a sport, is fundamentally different from other arts. But I think that removing slams actually reduces the effectiveness of some of these positions in a real fight. Like, look in MMA, right? Whenever you see a situation where a guy is trying to play close guard on a standing opponent, or they're trying to cling on like a backpack onto a standing opponent, most times it ends very, very badly. And I think we're doing a disservice to people by basically creating a space where we convince people that is a safe position, because it's not, right?
Yeah, that's the one that concerns me, is if I'm on someone's back and they're gonna drop you right on your back, Rico Rodriguez style, on Marcelo Garcia.
And they might not be able to control it, right? Like, sometimes people fall over, and if you are the guy on the back and they fall on top of you, they might have very limited motor control to create a safe environment for you, even if that's their intent, let alone if they're malicious, right? I mean, I've seen some nasty back slams in MMA where people try to cling onto the back. That's something where I think if you get into that position where you're grabbed onto the person's back and they're able to stand up, I think at that point, like, you want to retain back control, but I think you've got to let go of your hooks, get to standing, and then maybe try like a back takedown or something. I don't think attempting a rear naked choke on a standing opponent is a smart idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of the sporty aspect of it, right? Which I can appreciate it. Like, I love sport jiu-jitsu as well. I'm by no means like a self-defense prude. In fact, I'm quite the opposite. I'm more of a jiu-jitsu competitor. But like for example, I don't really like closed guard jumping. I think it's kind of dicey. Even though I used it, but it was legal when I was white belt, and I used it like all through my white, all the way to purple belt in competition. Extremely effective technique, jumping closed guard, but you do leave yourself open for a slam right there. So, and you're putting a risk with uncontrolled falling body weight, as Danaher always talks about.
Yeah,
right? So it's like in the practice room, I don't like any of those moves. I don't like guard jumping. I don't like scissor takedowns or anything where there's falling body weight that could possibly hurt someone's knee. But in terms of effectiveness, it's super effective.
Yeah, well, what you're talking about there is body tethering plus momentum. And this is always a very dangerous combination for both people, right? When you're basically doing like a flying body tether that there is a high percentage chance that someone on either side of the equation could get hurt. So it's something to be mindful of. As I think it was Stephen Kesting who said something to the effect of like, there's nothing more pathetic than watching two people try to jump guard at the same time, which is definitely true.
Yeah. I've done that once. I remember one time in purple, I was fighting a guy and like, I knew he was going to pull guard on me. Like one of the biggest guard players I've ever met.
Some people just look like guard pullers.
Yeah. This is back when I would actually tease the idea of standing. So I go with them and we literally both tried to, actually he sat guard and I jumped guard and I actually jumped mount. and then the rest of the match, it was purple belt. So what would that be? 7-minute match?
Isn't it 5 or is it?
No, purple I think is 7. Oh God, you're gonna sound like noobs.
Oh well.
The rest of the fight literally was him trying to sweep and me holding on to my fucking 4 points. So yeah, like jumping guard is effective and cool things can happen. Like I think if your opponent's seated and you go for like a flying armbar on a seated opponent, I think that should be totally fine because
if your opponent's seated,
their knees are like he's not really at danger of you landing on him in a weird like with his leg in the wrong position.
And you're also not in much danger either. Like going for a flying attack on a standing opponent is one thing, but again, like if the guy's on the ground and you go for a flying attack, that should be totally safe for both people. I mean, I remember I saw Braulio Estema. He did a seminar up here years ago, and he was showing that where basically if you're in a situation where your opponent is like getting up in a scramble, he would just do like a flying triangle on them while they were coming up, while they were on their knees. And it's like, that should be totally safe.
Yeah, that's safe. I mean... Just because they're not actually standing on their legs.
Yeah.
Flying attacks on a standing opponent are not only dangerous for them, but yourself as well.
That's the thing, right? It's like it's like you are literally like a tetherball at that point. Like you're both of you could go falling, and it can be very dangerous for both people. Cool. Anything else you wanted to cover on that topic, Matt?
No, I think the main takeaway that one of the main things we discussed was alignment over position, and that really is a game-changing concept. In terms of really when you're trying to put your game together and you're trying to think like when you can actually go for that armbar, when you can go for a triangle or when you can take the back or whatever, like really what are the underlying resources that your opponent has that you need to eliminate to make this work rather than just doing the move that you practiced over and over again. And I think for the instructors out there, really start to think about how you can break alignment. You're going to be not only are you going to be much more effective in teaching jiu-jitsu, but your students you're going to see that they're going to hit techniques at a way higher rate than just, if you're just thinking about practicing techniques.
Yep. Step 1, break alignment. Step 2, do the move rather than the other way around.
Pretty much.
Cool. So just recapping some of the mental models we talked about today. Of course, the topic of the day is body tethering. Basically, this means when you tie your body to your opponent's body. This can be beneficial for you or for your opponent, depending on who has proper alignment. If you are able to tie your body to your opponent and break their alignment, this is good for you because you can kind of be like an anchor who's pulling him down. But if the opposite is true and your opponent still has alignment, then you're going to be like a tetherball, and this is not where you want to be. Of course, the main concept behind this is alignment over position. Basically, as Matt just explained, focusing on prioritizing breaking your opponent's alignment versus trying to set up some position or technique. You will find that positions or techniques are a lot easier to achieve if you're constantly keeping your opponent on the defense by attempting to further break their alignment. We talked about controlled breathing. Very, very important to control your breathing, first of all, because it moderates your own energy level, but it also prevents you from panicking and going into a fight or flight response. And this is a strategy that, as the guy on the offense, you can exploit.
Yeah, and another thing about controlled breathing, I remember reading that Marcelo always would talk about, like, he always tries to keep not only control his breathing, but keep a straight face. subconsciously it kind of keeps him more calm and keeps his heart rate in check. So it's something that I try and do in competition as well, is keeping a straight face, and it kind of tricks you to think that you're not going to panic as much as might be appropriate at the moment.
Yeah. And of course, the last mental model we discussed today was do what works. It's very easy to get into the mindset of what is considered proper and not proper. But if you focus on just doing things because that's the way they've always been done, then that closes your mind to interesting and innovative ways to change the game. So don't just do things because people tell you that that's the way it should be done. Really think critically about these things. And at the end of the day, if a technique is effective, it's effective.
Yep.
Cool. So we got an interesting question that came in. This one I thought would actually be a really good topic to discuss, especially for both the instructors and the students out there. So we got a question from a listener who said that she's got a girl in her class who is around 20 years old, came in from a different martial art, possibly might be autistic. And the problem that's happening is that a lot of the other people in class don't want to work with this kid. So this particular student who wrote in, by default, is kind of the one who always winds up getting paired with the autistic kid. What she's saying is that this is actually representing quite a challenge because, of course, if this kid is potentially autistic, she doesn't necessarily listen. She's caused injuries a few different times. And the student who wrote into us is obviously a bit upset about this because from her perspective, you're paying a significant amount of money every month to train, but every time you go, you're getting paired up with someone who is a challenging partner and who, there's a risk of injury to yourself.
Is this a kids class or adult class?
I don't know. It isn't fully disclosed in here, but
she said 20.
Yeah, if the autistic girl is 20 plus, then presumably it's an adult class,
yeah, okay,
right? So,
okay.
So this is a difficult question because I can imagine what this would be like. As a smaller person, imagine you're getting in there. You're getting paired with someone who, has a mental health issue, and no one wants to be the person who says, "I don't want to train with that person," right? So I understand why this can be a difficult situation as a student because you're going to feel terrible if you go to your instructor and say, "Hey, I don't want to pair with the autistic person every time." It feels like an awful thing to say, and it does feel like you have some obligation to help this person. But on the converse, you're paying a significant amount of money for a service, and you're not getting it if you're getting paired up in these situations, especially if you believe that your health is at risk because you could be getting injured. So this is a very, very challenging situation, and it's a very difficult thing, both for instructors and for students to approach. Matt, this is probably something that you are maybe better off taking the first crack at as a full-time instructor. What are your thoughts on this issue, both from the student standpoint and the instructor standpoint?
Yeah, I have some kids in my kids programs that are, they have some mental challenges, some barriers, and it's definitely challenging. I think some of the best ways to deal with this is to definitely have more than one instructor on the floor at a time. You should have that regardless, but especially if there's someone with special needs, it really does help to have someone that can work with them specifically. I think that this person is totally within their right to, to be a little bit displeased with this, especially if it's an adult class and your training is starting to suffer because of it. You shouldn't be obligated to go with someone every time, regardless of whether or not they are, they're mentally challenged or whatever. I have friends that I have a friend that has a school, and he says that when a kid is coming in for their first class, he basically is conducting an interview, and he will tell the parent if he thinks the kid can go to the class or not, rather than I try and have a home for every kid that comes into my class, but there is something to be said for a child or a student who's not able to actually do the lesson, and forcing them to try and do the lesson might create a negative environment for some of the other people. So it might be one of those situations where you kind of have to make the sacrifice of someone who is unable to actually do the class for the sake of the well-being of the group. And it's a difficult challenge as an instructor. It's a difficult conversation to have with a student's parent. But, you know, I understand it, and I think that it could be necessary. I think that it's kind of up to the instructor to recognize different abilities within a class and then modify the class, or whether it's the structure of the class, or bring in someone to help that person, and to set different expectations for that person so that they can still, they can still get value out of the class and learn on their own level. It doesn't mean that they're going to be able to keep up with the class. As we all know, jiu-jitsu is super technical, you know, tons of details that are involved, and it might be one of those things where, hey, this person just might not be able to do the class. But I've found that kids that have things like autism can actually be extremely successful in jiu-jitsu because they have a hyper focus. It's just sometimes it might be up to the actual instructor who can teach it in a way that it's able to be absorbed, and they're able to maintain a level of focus that makes it possible for them to still enjoy the class and find it beneficial. If it's becoming a toxic environment where this person isn't coachable, hurts people, is disruptive, all these negative things, then it might be time to have a conversation with their parents and say, hey, like, I just don't think it's going to be just for the sake of the group. And I don't think they're actually, I think that's totally reasonable to do if it's at that level. If it's at a level where this person can still work with the group and they can still benefit and they're not hurting people, they're not being disruptive, then I think that there's going to be a home in the class for them. But otherwise, sometimes you have to have those tough conversations being the leader.
Yeah. It's this is a very difficult. It's one of those like ethical conundrums that they give you in like a philosophy class, because there's really no good answer, right? On one hand, you want to be a good training partner and you want to help people who are disadvantaged and have special needs, but on the other hand, you are paying for a service and you need to look out for yourself as well. If it were me, my feeling is like, look, at the end of the day, you are the paying customer here, right? Your instructor is the one who is getting enriched from creating a gym. Your instructor is the one who is getting paid when students come in as members. You don't receive any benefit from these other people being at the gym, right? You're paying for a service. You're not there to help prop up your instructor. If this is happening to you, where you're getting constantly paired up with this person and it's a detriment to your training, what that tells me is that, as Matt implied earlier, your coach or your instructor is not doing a good enough job of making sure that there is proper instruction on the floor.
Yeah, they're turning a blind eye, basically.
Yeah, they're basically
really weird.
Yeah, they're basically using you as an instructor. Like, the reality is, if you have special needs people on the team, they are going to require much, much more attention. And it might even be that they actually require a full-time instructor of their own. Yeah. So, if you are, now that said though, the message that has come through pretty clear in this email is that this person doesn't want to go to their instructor for fear of kind of like coming across as weak or being a complainer. But that said, I think that this is a completely justifiable complaint, and I don't think you should feel any shame or embarrassment in bringing it forward. I would bring it forward, but if you're concerned about how to kind of frame this to your instructor, what I would maybe say, rather than going in and saying, hey, I'm paying X dollars a month, I need better service than this, I would go in and maybe just say, like, look, I'm trying to help this person. I'm trying to make a good team, but this person needs more instruction than I can provide. I'm just a student myself and I can't do this. So I need more support from you. Can you make sure that when this person is training, maybe they get rotated in with other people? Yeah. Maybe where there's a more senior person, have another instructor or another coach on the floor. Maybe this special needs student's parents could be there. I mean, she's 20, but that's still pretty young. Maybe their parents could be there to assist. I think it's perfectly reasonable for you to say that, hey, look, I cannot do this by myself. I'm not trained at this. I'm not even trained at jiu-jitsu, So I need you as the head instructor and the person running this person to have more people on the floor to support this person. And I need to be able to get rotated in and out as well to get a break. That's how I would phrase this. And that way you're not being confrontational and coming in and, waving the whole, like, I'm paying you X dollars a month card. That can make people defensive, even if it is completely justifiable. So if you frame it as like, hey, this is for the good of the team, I think that you're going to have a lot more success with your coach.
Yeah, I think it's completely reasonable.
Yeah.
And especially if you're like a lower rank, you shouldn't take it upon yourself to be the instructor of someone who has special needs. It's kind of weird that that the coach hasn't taken it upon themselves to initiate a plan going forward, in my opinion. And if it's just falling by the wayside, then I feel like that might actually be a sign that your coach might be a little either ignorant or...
Well, they might not understand exactly how much attention is required when you have a special needs person, right? If they've never trained with a special needs student, they might not understand the amount of attention that you have to provide, and they might just be looking at you rolling with this kid and thinking, well, clearly everything's okay. Meanwhile, you're suffering and you're not getting the training you need, and you're worried about injury. So it could just be a level of ignorance, and this is a tough position to be in because, number one, presumably you're not really trained at jiu-jitsu. Presumably you're pretty junior. And number two, presumably you're not trained to work with special needs students. Yeah. So you're kind of like, you're lacking the expertise you need in both areas to make this relationship work. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to appeal to your instructor for help here.
Yep.
Cool. Anything else, Matt, that you want to add as a closing comment?
No, I think that was a really good chat. And that's it.
Cool. Well, as always, our home on the internet is bjjmentalmodels.com. If you want to learn more about specifically all of these mental model concepts we discussed, we've got a full database of those documented there. We're also pretty active on Facebook, Instagram, and just generally posting ideas, articles that we find relevant. So please do follow us there as well. This has been, I think, another good episode, a great chat. And so we will talk to you guys again next week.
All right, guys. Train safe. See you later.